I was 42 the day I learned what it feels like when your name is applauded and erased in the same breath. I sat in a room I'd helped fill with clients, I'd courted reports, I'd authored processes I'd built, and watched my father-in-law raise a crystal flute and give my promotion to a woman who had been there for 2 months and still asked me where the bathrooms were. I smiled so hard my jaw trembled. I clapped so the sound of my hands could drown out the roaring in my ears. I kept my back straight like we were on a moving train, and I alone knew the bridge ahead was out. I am a woman, a wife, and a senior operations manager who turned a department of 12 into 47 with steady hands and late nights. I grew up the oldest daughter of a school secretary who ironed her blouses on Sundays and a mechanic who could coax life back into engines with patience and prayer. We were not a family of shortcuts. We believed in work that left a good ache. When I married into a family whose business fed headlines and holiday tables, I loved that it might finally mean stability for me, for the husband I adored, for the children we planned, and then postponed as deadlines multiplied. I didn't understand then how loyalty can become a quiet harness you tighten yourself. They called it fresh perspective. They used words like transition, mentor, and support. They said I was so dependable the way people say, so nice when they mean so safe to overlook. I nodded. I congratulated. I offered to help. I closed my office door and laid my forehead against the cool window until the glass fogged with the shape of my breath. When my phone lit with my husband's name. How did it go? Finally official, I typed. We'll talk tonight because I couldn't yet form the sentence. Your father just slipped a ribbon around my throat and called it family. It is a special kind of humiliation to be told you are the backbone, and then to watch the body turn its face away from you. For 3 years I had missed birthdays and barbecues to rescue accounts on the brink, to untangle shipments stuck on docks, to soothe men who measured their respect in margins. For 3 years I believed that if I poured enough of myself into the vessel someone would taste the difference and pour something back. But the toast told the truth. I was a tool, useful, replaceable, expected to train the hand that would grip my handle next. That evening I drove home under a sky that looked bruised. My husband had set the table with candles, a peace offering he didn't yet know I needed. I told him the story in plain words so I wouldn't float away on the feelings: his father's smile, the niece's perfect hair, the new title that had been mine in every conversation but the one that counted. I watched the rage climb his throat like flame. I'll call him, he said, and I put my hand over his and said no. Because sometimes the only way to keep dignity from splintering is to carry it yourself, even when your arms shake. The next morning, I wore the navy suit that makes me stand taller and my grandmother's pearls that make me feel seen by women who lived through harder things. I welcomed the niece into my office and taught her how not to promise what a truck can't deliver. I showed her where the old contracts hide their landmines. I walked her through the way Mr. Morrison's voice changes when he's worried and how to answer that worry with timelines and truth. She scribbled like a student cramming before a final. I kept my tone gentle. I kept my anger cold. Cold is the only temperature at which a plan holds. At lunch, I stood in the break room and listened to their voices sift through the wall, the young woman's uncertainty like a bird tapping glass, my father-in-law's confidence like a gate slamming. He called me predictable. He said the clients were too comfortable with me. He said I wasn't going anywhere at my age, that this was a favor. I learned in that moment what it is to be invisible from the inside out. I picked up my soup, walked to my office, and shut the door softly so the decision could hear itself being made. I wrote the letter that night with the calm of a woman stepping out of a burning room, holding only what will rebuild a life. No accusations, no temperature, just dates and gratitude, and my signature drawn with a steady hand. I slept for the first time in weeks because the worst thing wasn't losing what I'd earned. The worst thing was staying to prove I deserved it to people who had already decided I did not. When I placed the envelope on his desk the next morning, he laughed like I'd told a joke right before the punchline. When he opened it, his face went pale, then flushed, then something in between, like a man discovering the ocean will not move just because he commands it. He said I couldn't be serious. He said Lily needed me. He said the company needed me. He said family. I said the one thing I hadn't let myself say for 3 years: I need respect more than I need permission. His mouth opened and closed like a hinge that had finally rusted through. I did not soften. I did not bargain. I left the office with my head high and my future in my hands, even if those hands trembled when I buckled my seatbelt in the parking lot. I tell you this, not for pity, but for clarity. Sometimes the twist isn't discovering what people did to you in the shadows. Sometimes the twist is realizing how long you've been dimming your own light to make their comfort easier to look at. And sometimes the only revenge worth carrying is the kind that transforms you so completely they do not recognize the woman who walks away. I remember walking out of that building with my resignation letter still trembling in his hand. For the first time in years, my steps felt like mine alone. No chain of obligations, no invisible leash tied to his approval, no weight of hoping he'd finally acknowledge my worth. Just the sound of my heels on the pavement, sharp and steady, like punctuation to a chapter I had finally ended. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank notebook in front of me. Emma, my younger sister, had once told me that the only way to keep from drowning in betrayal is to write down the truth before it eats you alive. So I did. I wrote about the missed birthdays, the late-night conference calls, the endless compromises I made, because I believed loyalty would protect me. I wrote about the countless times I defended his choices to my husband, reminding myself that family comes first, even when it meant placing my own dignity last. But as the pen moved, something shifted. The words stopped sounding like grief and started sounding like evidence. Not evidence for a courtroom, no judge could give me back the years I lost, but evidence for myself. Proof that I wasn't crazy or weak or invisible. Proof that I had carried a company on my back and that the laughter of men at a boardroom table didn't erase the sweat on my skin. The calls started coming 2 days later. First my husband, his voice urgent. "Dad says you're bluffing. Tell me you're bluffing." Then my father-in-law himself, with a tone dipped in honey but sharpened by fear. "You've made your point, dear. Come back in, let's talk about adjustments." Adjustments. As though respect was a knob he could turn up or down depending on my silence. I didn't answer. But the one that nearly broke me came from Lily, the niece who had unknowingly stepped into the throne they built from my bones. Her voice cracked on the phone. "I can't do this without you. They're eating me alive. I don't even know how to manage a single shipment. Please." I closed my eyes, pressed the receiver to my ear, and felt the ache of every instinct telling me to fix it, to rescue, to bleed myself dry one more time for someone else's comfort. But then I thought of my own reflection that morning, the woman who finally dared to look herself in the eye without shame. And I said softly, "Then you'll learn the way I did. Alone." For weeks I stayed quiet. It was the hardest discipline I had ever practiced. Silence had always been my prison, but now I wielded it as a blade. Rumors began to drift back to me from former colleagues, accounts falling through, clients threatening to walk, projects unraveling, because the only person who had ever held the threads together was gone. One evening, my husband sat across from me at the dinner table, his face pale. "He's panicking," he admitted. "They're realizing you weren't just dependable. You were the backbone." I watched the realization flicker in his eyes, the painful recognition that his silence at those family dinners had made him complicit. He reached for my hand. "I should have defended you." I pulled my hand away, not out of cruelty, but because forgiveness could not be offered in a single evening. Scars take time to settle before they stop bleeding. "You believed him," I said simply. "You believed I was safe to overlook." His eyes filled with tears, but for once I didn't soften to catch them. Instead, I poured myself into something new. I took the notebook of evidence and turned it into a blueprint for my own company. Not one inherited through family strings, but one born entirely of my sweat, my ideas, my vision. The first client I landed was one of their oldest accounts, the very man my father-in-law had once claimed would never leave. He called me after hearing whispers of my departure. His words still ring in my ears. "We trusted the company because we trusted you. Wherever you go, we'll follow." That was the moment I realized betrayal doesn't just strip you, it refines you. It burns away illusions until all that remains is the raw, indestructible truth. And yet, late at night, when the house is quiet and the lamp throws long shadows across the room, the grief still finds me. I remember the girl who clapped for someone else's promotion, who swallowed her tears under chandeliers. I grieve for her silence, for her faith in people who never intended to honor it. But then I breathe, and I remind myself she didn't die there. She walked out. She wrote her truth. She is me, and I am still here. The letter that wiped the smile off his face was not the end. It was the beginning. And though he may never admit it, he will remember forever that the woman he mocked, the woman he dismissed, the woman he thought too predictable, was the same woman who walked away without looking back. The weeks stretched into months, and with each one I could feel the distance growing between who I had been and who I was becoming. For years my identity had been stitched to their approval, their meetings, their dinners, their praise that came as sparingly as rain in a drought. Now, with every sunrise, I felt myself stepping further into a life that belonged only to me. My father-in-law's empire began to wobble in public. Articles appeared in trade magazines about botched contracts and missed shipments. A whisper spread among the clients that the company wasn't what it used to be. Friends still inside sent me quiet messages. "They're floundering without you." At first, I felt a pang of guilt, like I'd abandoned something fragile. But then I remembered the nights I had been fragile too, crumbling under the weight of their disregard. They hadn't blinked then. Why should I now? One evening, I opened my laptop and found an email waiting from a familiar name, Mr. Carter, one of the firm's oldest clients. "We hear you're no longer with them. If you're considering something new, we'd like to talk." My heart raced, not with fear this time, but with possibility. For the first time, I saw my years of labor not as wasted, but as proof of what I could do. The loyalty of those clients wasn't tied to the family name, it was tied to me. When I told my husband, he sat in stunned silence. Then he whispered, "They're going to hate you for this." I met his gaze. "They already do." And so I began again. I rented a small office, one room, one desk, one lamp that flickered if you plugged too much into the wall. It didn't matter. It was mine. I built a new company with my own name on the door, no shadows to hide behind, no family strings pulling me down. I hired people who had been overlooked, people who reminded me of myself, hardworking, loyal, underestimated. We grew fast not because I was chasing revenge, but because I was finally free to chase vision. But revenge has a way of finding you even when you don't go looking for it. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. My father-in-law's voice was thinner than I had ever heard it. "We need to talk," he said. "The company, it's slipping. We could use your expertise." For a moment, silence filled me, heavy and sweet. The same man who had laughed in my face, who had dismissed my worth, was now asking for help. I thought of all the nights I had prayed for recognition, for one word of validation from him. And here it was disguised as desperation. I chose my reply carefully. "You were right," I told him. "I'm predictable, predictably done with you." And I hung up. The news of their collapse spread like wildfire months later. They downsized, then downsized again. The niece left quietly, slipping out before the headlines got too sharp. My husband's eyes were full of conflict when he told me, his voice somewhere between grief and awe. "You really were the backbone," he said softly. I didn't gloat. I didn't dance on the ashes. Instead, I stood at my own office window looking out at the city lights. Betrayal had carved me open, but it had also carved me into something sharper, stronger. The woman who once clapped politely under chandeliers was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own value, whether the world recognized it or not. And though the scars of their laughter still ache on rainy nights, I carry them like proof. Proof that I survived. Proof that I refused to stay silent. Proof that I walked away and built something they could never take credit for again. The truth is, the letter I left on his desk wasn't just my resignation. It was my declaration. My promise to myself that I would never again ask permission to be seen. The day the official announcement hit the industry papers, I was sitting at my own desk, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. The headline was "Bold, Merciless Family Giant Crumbles After Leadership Shakeup." My phone buzzed nonstop, former colleagues, clients, even competitors calling to ask what had really happened. I gave no interviews, I didn't need to. The silence itself spoke louder than any words I could have said. At home, I watched Emma, my younger sister, who had once told me to write down the truth beam with pride. "You did it," she whispered over dinner one night. "You turned their betrayal into your beginning." I smiled, but deep down, I knew it wasn't just about building something new. It was about finally reclaiming my name, my dignity, my voice. But not everything was victory. My marriage bore its own fractures, ones I hadn't dared to examine before. My husband carried guilt like a stone in his chest. He apologized often, sometimes too often, as if words could erase the years he had watched me shrink without ever demanding space for me. I didn't know if forgiveness could bloom in soil so trampled, but I knew I owed myself the chance to find out. We began therapy. For the first time, he listened without defense, and I spoke without fear. Healing came slowly, awkwardly, like sunlight through blinds. Meanwhile, my company thrived. Clients who had once been theirs now signed contracts with me, shaking my hand with genuine respect. I hired a team of people who had once been overlooked the same way I had, and I watched them rise like wildflowers breaking through concrete. Together, we built something rooted not in entitlement, but in resilience. And then one evening, I received a letter, not an email, not a voicemail, but a handwritten letter from my father-in-law. His script was shaky, as if his hand trembled when he wrote it. He apologized. He admitted he had underestimated me, dismissed me, broken me down. But what struck me most wasn't his words. It was the emptiness between the lines. Apologies that come only after everything is lost are not bridges, they are tombstones. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not out of forgiveness, but out of finality. I didn't need his validation anymore. His opinion had no currency in the empire I was building with my own two hands. The real victory wasn't watching his company fall. It was waking up every morning and knowing that I was no longer afraid of being invisible. The real revenge wasn't firing back with rage, it was living so boldly that his memory of me as predictable became laughable. Sometimes I still replay that night in my head, the chandelier lights, the clinking glasses, the sound of his voice as he handed my promotion to someone else. Only now the memory no longer burns. It glows like a cautionary tale, a reminder of who I will never allow myself to be, again silent, small, waiting for permission. If you're listening to my story now, maybe you felt the same sting, the laughter at your expense, the dismissal of your worth, the betrayal that carved through your trust. Hear me when I say this, you are not invisible, you are not replaceable, and the moment you choose to walk away from those who cannot see your value is the moment you reclaim your power. This is not just my story. It's a lesson carved from pain that the deepest betrayal can also become the spark for your greatest rebirth. So if my journey touched your heart, if it made you reflect on your own scars and strength, I ask you to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and truth. And please leave a comment with your own experience, because every story matters, and your voice deserves to be heard.